The Susan Brender Show is a radio show online broadcasted on YouTube across the United States and globally. The show features guests who speak about health, spirituality, entertainment, and a host of subjects to enlighten people across the nation. Listen to the show that empowers women and men alike and highlights those who have made a difference.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today we have three guests. Now, before I introduce them, I want to say something which I think is very important. You know, educating about implementing human and environmental rights, world citizenship and world law, and creating the institutions of law at the level that will help humans to live together peacefully with each other and sustainably with the earth. Now, this is one of the things that these people are involved with, and my guests are named Authur, Kanegis, David Gallup, Michael Solomon. Now, Michael Solomon has been a guest on our show. He's a friend of the show, and he's a pundit and a writer, an author of many, many good books. And Authur is a film producer. And David Gallup, he's a president of the World Service Authority and a lawyer as well. I want to welcome all three of you on the Susan Brender Show. It's really great to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be back with you.
Thank you. Now, here's the thing. Authur, Kanegis, you have a vision, and David as well, world peace and justice through world citizenship and world law, world citizen flag as well. Now, why is that your vision? Start with you, Authur Kanegis. Why is that your vision?
Well, that's my vision, because visions are what helps create our reality. And so what happened is first I made films about nuclear war and the risks and danger. I worked with Paul Newman to produce a film called War Without Winners, about the fact that there are no winners in a nuclear war. It's suicide for all of us. And I was the nuclear war researcher on the film The Day After, the devastating film about the impact of nuclear war, with that 100 million Americans watched and 200 million Soviets, and it helped convince Ronald Reagan. He says in his memoirs, it convinced him not to believe his generals when they were telling him he could fight and win a nuclear war. And, you know, they were actually egging him on. He said that film showed him you couldn't win a nuclear war. So I realized after that movie was made, I thought, well, this will finally, end the arms race. People will see the insanity of the course we're on. And of course, it didn't. The arms race went on. As we know today, now we're on another nuclear arms race, and more, the nuclear dangers continued to increase. And I thought, well, how can that be? How can people look at that destruction right in the face of it, our total loss, destruction of everything that humans have created, everything we love and know, our pets, everything all gone. Why didn't knowing that would happen change it? Well, the answer was that we don't have a vision of what the alternative is. Everybody knows what the problems are. All around, we know the problems, and we get film after film about the terrible problems and the destruction we're heading toward. But we don't have that inspiring vision of the future we want. And when I was working as a nuclear war researcher, and we had to fax out the bomb damage effects to the crews, different distances from the epicenter, and I would have nuclear war nightmares. And so I was meditating in Friends meeting, and it came to me that we had long ago learned that if in my meditation, I visualize and picture exactly what I want, it's more likely to happen in a visceral way. And I said, well, if we're constantly picturing devastation and destruction, no wonder it's not working. What is it we need to picture for a positive future? And I went on a quest to develop several different projects along that way, and finally met the amazing Garry Davis, who was living out the future where many of us dream of, that prophets from the day one have dreamt of one world, one citizenship. He lived as a citizen of no nation, only the world, for over 65 years of his life.
Yeah. And Michael, when you listen to what Authur has to say, what's your response to that?
Well, I think he's 100% right. I can't ever vision a scenario where anybody can ever win a nuclear war. I mean, I agree with him 100%. There's really nothing more to say about that. I'm just concerned about the world citizenship program that you're promoting, sort of. And my question for that is, are you looking for countries that don't have borders? If we're going to have one world citizenship, does that mean that we can do away with borders and everybody can travel freely?
Well, let me jump in on that say that, first of all, if you look at the world, it already, and you check it out from outer space, it already is one world. I mean, these borders are artificial constructs that we human beings have created, and we fight wars over them, and we cause so many crucial problems that we're facing in the world. Practically all of them could be resolved if we can come together as the people on the planet, instead of a system that divides us and separates us. If we had a system that amalgamates and brings together the will of the people at the global level from the bottom up, where it's not, one side wins, one side loses, but where we're all interactively working on what would be the best for our planet. What do we envision? What do we want for our children and our grandchildren? And so we have quite a bit of a detailed vision that Garry Davis helped us develop of what we call the people-powered planet. A whole different way to run the world, and we think that vision can help inspire people toward rising above the nations that divide us, toward coming together as a planet, not getting rid of our separate nationalities. We keep all our diversity. In fact, to celebrate and protect the rich diversity of humanity and all the different cultures and peoples and things. Just don't have that be what divides us any more than in the U.S. Crossing a state line doesn't mean that we'll fight a war between New York and Pennsylvania. We take those problems to court. We solve our problems in other ways. Humanity's already invented a system that eliminates war, and that is if the world is our country. That's the name of the movie. The world is my country. If the world is my country, no wars and the problems like environmental devastation all become eminently manageable.
How could that become manageable if you've got societies without borders, and you got the haves and the have-nots, and the people that want to take more and give less? And I mean, I see that all over the place. I mean, you've got people coming here because let's look at the southern border alone. They're leaving their countries for two reasons. One, they claim that they're being oppressed. They're running out of food and water. They've got socialist societies that just take everything from them. And they're running all over the place. So we can't be, the United States, not only the United States, but the European countries too, with what's going on over there, can't be the provider for societies all over the place.
Well, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Now, if you take Europe, for example, Europe had centuries of wars between like France and Germany and all the different countries in Europe. And then they formed the European Union. And here, countries that had a lot of diversity found a way to take their issues to court, to have more integrated ways of dealing with economics and so on. And in those 70 years since that was created, there's been not a single war between one European nation with another. There's been wars outside, there's been maybe an internal civil war, but no wars between them because they developed a way to take it to court to solve in different ways. Now, inside the US, we also have incredible diversity of income. And we do have people that may move to a state with more benefits or something like that. But we find ways to manage those because we're one country and we come together. The exact same groups that are fighting and killing each other around the world may be living side by side in New York City, and they're living in peace because they take their issues to court. In other words, it doesn't mean that you take away all the tools for handling the big diversity, the big discrepancies in income. In fact, you create a world where there won't be those big discrepancies in income, because if you look at the incredible amount of resources and money that have gone into war and militarism, they've been far more than enough to wipe out poverty on the planet, to create a balanced ecological future for humanity, to give us all sustainable energy. These are all very, very doable if we weren't putting our resources into fighting and killing each other.
Yeah, but if you look at the open borders policy in the EU, it's become a disaster. Look what happened with Germany when they took in over 1 million refugees. Look what happened in France and in Paris with all the terrorists that came in there, and in Belgium. I mean, let's say we had a North American union the way they have an EU union. Do you want, let's say, Canada or Toronto making the rules for the U.S., for New York, for California, for
First of all, we have to get beyond just the nation state thinking and find ways that you and I and all of us can get together an interactive system that Garry was talking about devising, where we're looking at what is that, like we're doing in all these Zoom meetings. We have a ways that we cross political borders. The people on opposite sides of issues come together into a conversation where people are getting to know their inner feelings, their desires, what they want, and come together. We find that if you take any of these borders, people on almost any side of these issues, when they get to know each other as human beings, they can find they connect. It's the governments and systems that are disrupting us and keeping us from coming together. So the key thing is that, yes, in the current system, things are terrifically broken. And why are these refugees all streaming in? Because we've had wars that have been tearing up their societies, or because we've had economic systems that have taken away their resources and have not given them the ability to sustain themselves. And so it's the broken system that's causing the refugees, and it's the broken system we have to fix.
Just 1 second, Michael. Authur and David, you said that the UN court orders Russia to half invasion. How do we enforce it? That's what I want to know, because there's so much going on between Russia, China, and the United States, and even the countries in Europe. So from my standpoint, I just want to know how you stop an invasion.
Let me let David jump in, because I've been talking.
Sure. Well, you can't really stop an invasion in the current system that we are using to attempt to govern, but I would say more just run the world. The International Court of Justice did have a decision. It wasn't unanimous. There were 2 votes against the decision, which were Russia and China, but a decision nonetheless against the government of Russia, demanding that they immediately suspend military operations. But the UN doesn't have any kind of world peace or police force to actually take action upon that ruling. All they can do is maybe name and shame. And obviously that's not enough. So it would have to be other ways that humans come together to figure out how are we going to work together to prevent war in the future. I mean, Garry Davis was always saying that all these other issues that we're dealing with could really be resolved if we first figure out how we're going to ensure the survival of humanity and the earth. And until we really do that, all these other issues will continue to crop up. Wars and violence will continue to occur within the system we've created for ourselves.
Yeah. Michael, when you listen to what he just had to say, what's your opinion of that?
Well, the problem is we can do something about it. We did it with Milosevic in Yugoslavia with the UN when Clinton was president, when we invaded under the UN Security Council. Here's the problem that we've got. The United Nations isn't doing anything about what's going on in Yugoslavia and in the Ukraine, excuse me. And here's why. Okay, very simply, because the Security Council has to take action on that. And Russia's got veto powers in the Security Council. What has to be done, what should be done, is that Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, should call an emergency meeting of the General Assembly and remove Russia from the Security Council. Then we can do something. I mean, Russia vetoed in January, Russia vetoed the plan that they had, or the policy that they were coming out with, to stop them from going into the Ukraine, and he vetoed it. Putin had his people veto it. I mean, this is ridiculous. Why would you give him veto power on a council that is the only council in the UN that can stop him? I mean, I don't get it.
You're right, Michael. The UN Security Council is really what's the main thing that's broken about the United Nations, because with those 5 countries, with that veto power, nothing changes.
Nothing gets done.
Nothing gets done. Exactly. So if you're getting rid of the veto power, though, you have to realize you'd be getting rid of it for all of those 5 countries, not just for Russia, because even if you kicked out Russia, the point is that they still have nuclear weapons that they can drop wherever they decide, and we might have trouble stopping them. And the UN itself still embraces the idea that every single nation has exclusive sovereignty that can never be impinged upon or violated. That's in the UN Charter. So unless we change the Charter, upgrade it to something else, or get rid of it completely and come up with a completely new system to govern our world, these, like I said, these wars will continue to occur. Fortunately, it hasn't been another nuclear war since World War II. I mean,
There's never been a nuclear. Well, I wouldn't call it.
There were the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so I count that nuclear war.
Well, we were the only ones that had the weapon at the time. So
right, but now 9 countries have those weapons,
right?
And this is a travesty for humanity. I mean, like Authur said earlier, war is the biggest despoiler of the environment and the biggest waster of both human and natural resources. If we want to have a world that works for everyone, we have to figure out a way to outlaw war permanently. Because I have to say, war was actually outlawed in 1928 by the Kellogg-Briand Pact. And that is never
5 years later.
That's right. It's never been revoked, but that doesn't mean it stopped war. And that's because it's still built in the idea of exclusive national sovereignty. And Garry Davis would say, and I want to make this completely clear, there's nothing wrong with a nation state per se. It's the anarchy that exists between the nation states that is the breeding ground of war. It's that anarchy that caused his brother to be killed in World War II and caused him to kill hundreds, if not thousands of people in Brandenburg as a bomber pilot in World War II. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm going to stop you right there. Authur, let me ask you something. Let's talk a little bit about Biden's policies. Let's talk about Afghanistan and this and various other things, because we really made a big problem with Afghanistan. And what would you say? How did we do that? And why would we do that when we know that going to war is just horrible? So many people get killed. Our young people get killed. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, good question. If we step back and look at the big picture, we see that first the mighty Soviet Union tried to beat Afghanistan tribesmen and couldn't do it. And then the U.S., the mighty U.S. military with the most fantastic military power in the world, for 20 years pounded Afghanistan, and all it did is push them further into the hands of the Taliban, further into the hands of wiping out women's rights and of impoverishment. And war failed. It didn't work. It didn't work in Vietnam when France tried to beat people in the jungle in Vietnam, and they couldn't do it for years and years of war, and then we couldn't do it for years in war. And somehow we're in this insane position that we don't say, hey, if something isn't working after decades and centuries of doing it with incredible amount of money and resources, maybe we have to start thinking of a new system. Maybe the whole idea of military power is an oxymoron. That means something that is basically contains its opposite, that military is not powerful. Military is actually a form of powerlessness, because you thrash out at another person, you make them more angry, and so they come back stronger. And one side in every conflict, doesn't matter which one it is, if it's Putin and what's going on in the West, we threaten him more, he threatens us more, and then we threaten him more until it all blows up into the end of the world, and it doesn't get us out of it. And so then we have to ask, what is there that really is more powerful than military power? And there are two things, if you'd like me to tell you about them.
Sure, why not?
Okay. Well, the first one that actually is more powerful, but it doesn't fit this myth. We have this myth in our society that, the myth of the hero with the big gun and the poor, defenseless maiden is picked upon until finally the hero stands up, blows away the bad guy, and rides off into the sunset with the girl. That basic theme runs through our movies and our stories. And when something doesn't fit it, we hardly see it happening. Now, take this mighty, incredible Soviet military army, and they had the terrible KGB doing the most awful tortures, and the things they did were doing to Eastern European countries. Well, Lithuania and then Estonia were the first countries to actually, Lithuania was the first country to break away from the Soviet Union. And how did they do it? With a singing revolution. The Soviets poured in tanks, just like we're seeing in Ukraine. And what did they do? They were greeted by people singing, blocking them. When I went on a touring there, our tour guide said, well, I had climbed up on the TV tower and I was saying, oh, the tanks are coming down Revolutionary Avenue. And people didn't run away from the tanks. They all ran to the tanks and blocked them. And they had 14 people, 14 of the protesters were killed, and they beat the mighty Soviet army. The Soviets finally had to give up and let Lithuania go free. And it was such a huge, huge story. And yet most of you probably don't even know it, because it's outside of our story of the hero with the big gun. And so the news media don't notice it. If it bleeds, it leads. Well, it didn't bleed, it doesn't lead. And then, other countries broke away from the Soviet Union again with nonviolent revolutions, the Orange Revolution and so on. And this is much more powerful than military power. And they came away with their country intact and not being bombed to bits. And it's the same kind of courage, but it's focused into nonviolent action. And that's actually more powerful. And so I think that's the first key thing. And the second key thing that really has a big impact is law. When you look at it, take the US. Here we had in the South, a situation where, blacks were getting lynched. There was an incredible, basically apartheid kind of system. And if the blacks had, and Martin Luther King had the courage and others to lead them in a nonviolent revolution, basically. And the whole world, I guess the third key element is media, for the media to be watching it. The whole world was watching. We all saw that. And that was able to get turned around. Now, if every time a black church had been bombed, they had bombed a white church. If every time a black person got lynched, they had lynched a white person. That battle would still be going on today. They would still be hating each other more and more. We would never have had a black president or a black Supreme Court justice or any of that, because war just breeds more and more war. It doesn't solve the problem, but somehow that nonviolence broke through. But a key part of that was also law, and that is that then the civil rights law got passed, and then there was a requirement that states had to comply with allowing civil rights and so on, and that law had more force than blacks had tried to enforce it themselves and say, okay, well, you can't do this. We're going to go in and send in our black troops to enforce it. It wouldn't work. One side can't be the police of the world. That's what's trying to happen in Russia. And what's happened in other places. We've pointed ourselves kind of cops of the world, and we try to go around and fix things by being the cops, but we're not. We're one party, and we just create more anger. If we actually were world police, if there actually were humanity had come to a common agreement on these are the laws we all want to abide by, and now here are police enforcing it, there's so much more respect for that. It has a certain power and dignity to it that makes people want to comply, makes people want to go along with it, makes people turn against their leader because their leader's violating the law.
I'm going to stop you because here's the thing. Yeah, Michael, if you were to talk about what happened about 4 years ago with our President Trump, did we face this kind of really serious situation? Because as I recall, that didn't happen. Now, today it is happening, and our president is endorsing it. He says, okay, there's nothing wrong. What's your thoughts about that?
Well, it's not that he's enforcing it. I can go back to the Obama administration. I can go back to 1972 when Biden was first elected to the U.S. Senate. And intelligence officer in the United States, including his own Secretary of Defense, Bob Gates, said that ever since Biden was elected to the Senate, he's been wrong on every foreign policy ever. Those aren't my words; those are his. And I look back at what he's done and everything else, and that was it. When they talked about everything else going on in Ukraine. What he's done is the Ukraine is looking for munitions. They wanted planes. They wanted the MiGs from Poland. He refused to replace Poland's MiGs. If Poland was willing to give Zelensky the MiGs to fight the Russians, but Biden wouldn't replace them with the F-16s. That's ridiculous. I mean, he's sending them $1.2 billion, but he's not sending them any military aid. He's sending them money. He's sending them food, meals ready to eat. What are they going to do with meals ready to eat? Throw them at Putin? It's ridiculous. You can't fight a war with food. You can't fight a war where you must fight with munitions. Do we want to continue it going? I mean, there's nothing you can say, as far as I'm concerned. What's happening today in the Ukraine is genocide. The only difference between what Hitler was doing and what Putin is doing today is there's no camps. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason why man would take his soldiers or his armies and march through a town or a city in the Ukraine and just kill everything in sight. That's ridiculous. Babies, women, children. I mean, this is if you don't call that genocide, and they won't do it. Where's the World Court in all of this? Where's the UN? Throw him out of the Security Council. The Helsinki Final Act of 1975 stated that the priorities of the international security architecture should be sovereign equality. Every country should have their own sovereign. They're supposed to refrain from threats and the use of force. These are the edicts of the Security Council. Involuntary frontiers and delineated borders, and the territorial integrity of states and borders and countries. That's what's supposed to be. And those are the principles of the Security Council. And Putin is not adhering to that. There is no other reason in the world why he shouldn't be thrown out of the Security Council except for those alone. And they're not doing it. The UN is useless. It's been useless since 1948. I don't care what anybody tells me. And all we do as the United States is we pay everybody's dues every year. We pay more than anyone else. Nobody's paying it. The same thing, listen, did I like Trump's tweets and his nastiness with the press? Absolutely not. Did I like his policies? We went 4 years without a skirmish, without a war. He got NATO to pay their fair dues, which is what they should have been doing all along. And as much as people were making up stories about him and Russia, it turned out that he kept Russia quiet for the last 4 years. I mean, it's I don't know. People have said to me, if he was still president, this wouldn't be going on in Ukraine. I don't know if it's true or not, but I'm pretty sure that it probably wouldn't have been.
David, when you listen to what Michael has to say, what's your opinion about that? And how do you feel about that?
I think he expresses a fear that many people, not just in the United States, but around the world share. A fear that at any point we could be a marauding army, could come in and take over, and all of your rights would be thrown out the window. And that's the problem with the system that we're dealing with, the system of law. And Michael makes the point that why isn't the UN acting, even though there's been an International Court of Justice holding against the government of Russia? Why haven't they, like he said, thrown Russia either out of the UN or revoked its veto? Because I do think there's a concern that this could lead to a nuclear altercation. And that's the problem when we have 20,000 or whatever, 35,000 nuclear warheads still ready and available by the national government leaders who have them. This, and we shouldn't be living in that kind of world. We need to imagine a world that works for everybody, where this fear, this concern wouldn't have to exist. So, I mean, I guess I would ask Michael, what would you do differently outside of the UN system to make sure that there's never a nuclear war?
I would park my biggest battleships right in the Black Sea.
Well, but that's still okay. Maybe I need to.
But no.
What would you, Michael? Wait, let me ask you. What would you do that is not a military action to prevent a future war?
I would stop sending Putin $3 billion a week for his oil. I would shut him down in a heartbeat, his gas and oil. and that was it. I would open up the pipelines in this country today, and we would become energy independent once again. The country in the world that controls energy controls everything and can control the peace. And that's a fact of history. That is an absolute historical fact.
Well, we're at the end of the show, so I always ask my audience many questions that they would have, but I can't do that today. So I'm going to ask you guys, if you know something or have something to say it right now.
Well, I'd just like to say that I think people need so much, as we said from the very beginning, a vision of a whole different way to be running our world. Inside the broken system, there may be no answers, and we may be heading toward nuclear extinction, the end of life on Earth. But once we start visualizing outside of that other possibilities, we humans are an incredibly inventive species, and we can invent whole new, much better ways of running and governing our world. If you see our movie, theworldismycountry.com, go to theworldismycountry.com and watch that inspiring movie of this incredible guy, Garry Davis, who is world citizen #1, and the inspiring vision he left us for how we can build a world that works for everyone. And it has to step beyond this system of, thinking that somehow military power, which failed over and over again, is going to somehow work if we just had more of it, if we just had enough to really squeeze Putin, it would solve it. No, then they just get even worse, and they blow off their nuclear weapons, and that's the end of America and the United States. If they shoot off their nuclear weapons, we're all gone. Putting maximum pressure on them is not going to be the way to solve it. It's going to be to create a world that works for everyone, a whole better system. And we need that vision to send us in the direction of a new reality. So watch our film, The World Is My Country. Find out more about our podcast on that, People Powered Planet podcast, and find a way that we can get out of this mess we're in. Because we humans created this mess, we can create a better way.
And David, what about you? What's your last word?
Einstein said imagination is more important than intelligence. And we as humans have vast imagination, but we just need to start using it to make the kind of world, to imagine the kind of world that we want. Garry Davis, when he gave up his US citizenship and declared himself a world citizen after World War II, he had to imagine a world where he, as a human being, had rights that would be respected. So he had to imagine that world and start building that world. And that's what we're doing at World Service Authority in Washington, D.C., is to help people to understand who they are as human beings, first and foremost on planet Earth. Like Einstein also said, remember your humanity and forget the rest.
And Authur, and also David, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Well, they can go to theworldismycountry.com, and there's a contact form there. They can also email futurewavefilms@gmail.com, and they can that's the best ways to get in touch with us. Okay,
and what about you, David?
I just put it in the chat. I don't know if you are looking at that, but our website is worldcitizengov.org. So worldcitizengov.org would be the main place to go to find out what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then the email is basically info@worldcitizengov.org.
And Michael, your last word.
This is a simple one, Susan, because you know my stance on this. I would put religion and back into society, and I'll tell you why. You don't have to be extremely religious, especially in the United States. I mean, what we're doing is we're getting rid of everything. They want to get rid of Christianity, want to get rid of Judaism, they want to get rid of everything, and they want to just do away with religion. There's 1.3 million atheists in this country. That's according to the last census, out of 330 million citizens in the United States. How did they get so powerful? It's less than 1/10 of 1%. But here's what it is. It's not that you don't have to be religious. You don't have to pray to Jesus or Moses or anything else. When I was growing up, I wasn't religious, okay? I went with my friends to church because that's where they were on Saturday afternoon when they went to confession. My rabbis and my friends priests used to preach the same thing. Be kind to your parents. There's a heaven, there's a hell. We knew the difference between right and wrong. It's no different when you're two individuals or two countries. If you have a sense of heaven and hell, you know there's a right and a wrong. If you put a gun in two kids' hands, one who has a sense of right and wrong and one who never goes to church, who doesn't give a damn, and you tell them both to shoot somebody, who do you think is going to pull the trigger? Certainly not going to be the kid who knows there's right and wrong out there. And that's what's going on in this country today as far as crime is concerned. And it's happening in the rest of the world as far as armies are concerned. I mean, why in God's name are these Soviet soldiers who are no different than you, me, or anybody else, who bleed the same way, who have the same feelings, right and wrong, why are they going into the Ukraine and just shooting people indiscriminately? Because they don't have a sense of right and wrong. They are blindly following a madman. And that's what's happening.
And Michael, what about your last book?
Well, my last book was a business book. It's Mental Acuity, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Shaping Your Mind for Greater Success.
Well, with that said, we have to do a follow-up because there's so much that you have to give and talk about. So I want to thank the three of you for being on the Susan Brender Show. It sure has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing your views.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate it.